Think about the last time a car surprised you. Not a supercar, not a limited edition, not something with a famous badge. Just an ordinary, sensible, everyday car that turned out to be extraordinary in a way nobody expected. And hold that feeling, because what you are about to hear is exactly that kind of story, except it happened in the early 1950s, and most people have never heard a single word of it. The Ford Zephyr Mk I looks, at first glance, like exactly what it was sold as: a practical British family saloon, 4 doors, a modest chrome grille, sensible proportions, the kind of car a bank clerk or a family doctor might have driven to work on a gray Tuesday morning. But beneath that quiet, understated body, this car was carrying secrets that the rest of the global motor industry would not catch up with for another 20 years. And it won 2 of the toughest motorsport events on the planet while doing it, beating cars that cost twice as much with engines far more powerful than its own, and today most people do not even know it existed. More than 150,000 Ford Zephyr Mk were built between January 1951 and February 1956 at Ford's factory in Dagenham, Essex, and the story of how this car came to be, what it achieved, and why it quietly disappeared is one of the most genuinely surprising chapters in British automotive history. So let us go back to the beginning and tell it properly. It is October 1950, the Earl's Court Motor Show in London, and the crowd gathered around 2 brand new Fords is buzzing in a way that motor show crowds rarely do, because what Ford of Britain has unveiled, the 4-cylinder Consul and the 6-cylinder Zephyr 6, looks nothing like anything that has ever come out of a British factory before, with a clean, full-width body sweeping from front to rear without a single separate fender, inspired by the modern American Fords being built in Detroit. And underneath that body is something hidden that none of the other manufacturers in that hall have yet managed to put into a car sold to ordinary people. And here is where the story takes its first extraordinary turn. The Ford Zephyr Mk I was the first mass-produced car in the world to use McPherson strut independent front suspension. Let that sit for a moment. The McPherson strut, a brilliantly compact design that combined the wheel guide and shock absorber into a single unit, invented by American engineer Earl McPherson during his time at Ford, had never before been fitted to a car coming off a production line at any scale, and Ford of Britain put it into a family saloon available to anyone who could scrape together the price of a modest home in a showroom. And what this gave the Zephyr was a ride quality and road holding that most of its far more expensive rivals simply could not match in everyday driving. But here is the part that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. If you walk outside right now and crouch down by the front corner of your own car, almost certainly you will find a McPherson strut sitting there, still doing exactly what it was designed to do 7 decades ago, because every major car manufacturer in the world eventually adopted this design once Ford's patents expired. And today, it is the dominant front suspension system on the planet. All of it traceable back to a British family saloon that most of the world has completely forgotten. Ford knew they had built something different, and they were not quiet about it. They marketed the Zephyr Mk I as their 5-star car, naming 5 specific areas where it broke new ground simultaneously. That strong monocoque body with no separate chassis, the brand new overhead valve 6-cylinder engine replacing the old side valve designs most British cars still relied on, the revolutionary McPherson strut suspension, a modern 12-volt electrical system, and hydraulic brakes on all 4 wheels. And together these 5 things meant that when a family in 1951 walked into a Ford showroom and drove away in a base Zephyr for around 600 pounds, they were sitting inside a car that was more technically advanced than an Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire or a Daimler, cars that cost vastly more and carried names that spoke of old money and tradition, and yet here was a working family in Dagenham driving something ahead of them. Now, and this is where the story becomes something else entirely. Go back to a freezing night in February 1953, somewhere high in the French Alps, the roads glazed with ice, the mountains completely black around a pale yellow car pushing through the darkness, and understand what Maurice Gatsenides was doing inside that Ford Zephyr Mk I. Gatsenides was a Dutch rally driver of extraordinary precision and thoroughness, a man so obsessed with preparation that before the 1953 Monte Carlo rally he had spent an entire month with his family in the south of France driving every mountain pass on the route, not once or twice but many times, memorizing each corner at each of the 7 different average speeds the organizers might set on the day, because the Monte Carlo rally of that era was partly a pure endurance run across hundreds of miles of winter road from various starting points in Europe, and partly a final timed regularity test on a demanding mountain circuit, and Gatsenides understood that the winner would be the driver who had spent the most time thinking before the flag ever dropped. What most people never realized was that Gatsenides had prepared a solution even for a problem that could not be fixed in advance. The drum brakes on his Ford Zephyr would inevitably fade with heat on the long mountain descent of the final test on the Col de Braus, and since the rules of the rally did not allow a brake upgrade, he did something wonderfully human and completely unexpected. He stationed 2 teams of people at the tight hairpin bends on the descent below, and gave each of them buckets of water, with simple instructions to throw those buckets onto the front brakes of the Zephyr as it came flying past, cooling them enough to keep them working for the rest of the run. And when that yellow family Ford crossed the finish line in Monaco and Maurice Gatsonides was declared the outright winner of the 1953 Monte Carlo Rally, he had beaten a Jaguar Mark I, a car with a 3.4-liter twin-cam engine producing 160 horsepower, a car costing more than double the price of the Zephyr in the showroom, and Motorsport magazine wrote at the time that the Ford's win proved the Dagenham factory had all the answers when it came to building cars for efficient, long-distance winter work. And ordinary Ford owners all across Britain felt an enormous, quietly proud surge of something that motor racing rarely gives ordinary people, which is the feeling that the car on their own driveway had just beaten the best in the world. And now the connection that almost nobody alive today makes. Maurice Gatsonides, the man who drove a family Ford to the top of the rally world, is also the man who later invented the Gatso speed camera, the radar device used by police forces across Europe and beyond to photograph speeding drivers. And the extraordinary irony is that Gatsonides invented it not to catch people going fast, but to measure his own cornering speed so he could go faster on rally stages. And by 1958 he had founded Gatsometer BV in the Netherlands and turned a personal timing tool into one of the most widespread pieces of road enforcement technology ever built. And Gatsonides himself later admitted that he was caught by his own camera multiple times, saying he could not escape it because he loved speeding. So the Ford Zephyr Mk I is the car that gave the world its most celebrated rally result and, indirectly, every driver's least favorite piece of roadside furniture. 2 years after Monte Carlo, the Zephyr went back to work. In 1955, Vic Preston Sr. and his co-driver DP Marwaha drove a Zephyr 6 to outright victory in the East African Safari Rally, an event run across thousands of kilometers of unpaved road through Kenya, Uganda, and Tanganyika, where dust, rock, heat, and mechanical punishment regularly destroyed far more powerful and far more expensive cars long before the finish line. And the fact that this sensible, modestly priced British saloon built for commuters and families won 2 of the most demanding rally events in the world in the space of 2 years, Monte Carlo 1953 and the African Safari 1955, is a chapter so completely overlooked that it should genuinely make you stop and wonder how the story of this car was ever allowed to fade. The Zephyr Mk I's cabin had one more American-influenced secret worth knowing: the column-mounted gear change and the flat front bench seat, borrowed directly from the design language of contemporary Detroit Fords, which together meant that 3 adults could sit comfortably across the front of the car, something almost no British saloon of the era could offer, and for families in early 1950s Britain, only just beginning to emerge from years of wartime rationing and post-war austerity. The generous, practical, modern interior of a Zephyr was not a small thing. It was the difference between a car that fitted your life and one that merely transported you. By February 1956, the Zephyr Mk I's production run was finished, replaced by the updated Mk2, and the original cars gradually disappeared from British roads through the 1960s. Many victims of the decade's strict roadworthiness testing that condemned thousands of monocoque-bodied saloons whose steel shells had begun to rust in Britain's wet winters, not because the engines failed, not because the suspension gave up, but because the bodies corroded and the inspection regime of the era showed no mercy. And a car that had changed suspension engineering forever, won the Monte Carlo Rally, won the African Safari, and given ordinary British families something genuinely extraordinary for an ordinary price quietly slipped away without a proper farewell. Today a good Zephyr Mk I can fetch more than £15,000, cherished by the dedicated enthusiasts who understand what this forgotten saloon actually meant. And rightly so, because every modern car you have ever driven carries a piece of its engineering under its front wheels, whether the driver knows it or not. Did you ever own a Ford Zephyr, or perhaps remember one parked on your street as a child? Share your memory in the comments. Stories like this one deserve to be kept alive.